Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Leader series. I'm your host, Dr. Ananya. I'm here today with the amazing Cheryl Sambadzai. She is a Master's of Arts candidate in Historical Studies at the University of Cape Town. And Cheryl has a huge experience in creating content for diverse audiences and publishing articles along with digital production. Although very young, she had also held various leadership roles, including chairperson of the UCT Zimbabwe Student Society and International Students Coordinator for UCT Student Representative Council. Cheryl's education expands from film theory and practice to media and history. She has received several awards and scholarships, including Netflix Scholarship, a Student Leadership Award plus Gold Award from University of Cape Town, and the Envision It Dare to Dream It Foundation Scholarship. I'm so excited. Cheryl, welcome to the Everyday Leader.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have you here. And I just want to start off by sharing this with my audience for those people who have never met you or probably might not meet you. I just want to tell them how confident and vibrant, and you just have such a beautiful aura. And you're one of those women, the few women I know that walks confidently into her feminine and always celebrating, her womanhood. So more power to you, girly. I admire you so much.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind. Um, yeah, so Cheryl, your work spans from historical studies to media production and activism. So, what does the concept everyday leader mean to you through these colorful lenses?
Yes. So, because I've spent, as you mentioned, the leadership aspect and in general in many other spaces, I've seen that people conceive a leader as somebody who is like, the poster child for like activism. It's the outspoken person who's speaking in public, who holds the large authority, and is also usually a male figure. But this is not the case at all. And I can say that, it starts at home. Leadership starts at home, how you treat people and the values that you instill. That is true. But also at the same time, we spend most of our time at school or at work or both. So to me, the everyday leader is not just the person who is at the pulpit of power, but really it is somebody who is intentional and is wide lens towards a common good. And that's within their capacity, knowledge, and skills. So whether that's you being a painter or you're a professor, you're a doctor, a surgeon, you're an astronaut even, you really can be a leader in your own right, and you're using your resources for the common good and not just for um for a selfish end. And also, I think importantly, it is not only taking ownership of that power which you have and the agency that you have every day and using it for the common good, but it is also understanding your power in relation to other people, because I might be, for example, in the SRC and I have that power, but that might mean I impose on somebody's agency because of maybe the power I might carry in a room where my role takes greater precedence. Not that it's more important than anybody else, but maybe in a particular room it takes greater precedence than somebody else. So you need to also understand those power dynamics. And furthermore, knowing how to be led. And knowing how to be led really comes from the fact that you need to be able to submit to people in your leadership. And that means submitting not only to, a person who you view as having enough authority for you to submit to, but even that person who might not be in the same position of power as you. It might be in a different space, whether that is activism, whether that is art, and you're a surgeon. You are at some point going to need to submit to like the filmmaker, whom you need to tell your story. You might need to submit to the community healthcare worker. You might need to submit to the lady who runs community internships, who run community initiatives. And submission is really as powerful as you are as a leader, because we really all need each other at the end of the day. So, in summary, the everyday leader is really a sum total of everything that you do in your life, seeing that that is where we spend most of our productive time and doing it for the common good, understanding that you have power, but also your power might disempower somebody else. So, you need to learn how to submit to the everyday person. Yeah.
Wow, that was so beautiful. You mentioned so many good points. I never thought about it, but you're right. In order to be a good leader, you also need to know how to be led, right? So
Yes.
it's because if you're a good student, then you might potentially become a good teacher kind of thing. So I feel like it's the same thing
Yeah.
going on here, and that is very important. And like you said, sometimes when people from different fields and backgrounds come together,
Hmm.
sometimes to make that teamwork bring out the goal or the vision that was set out in the first place for those members to come together, then one group has probably to submit to another group. So I love how you
Yeah.
put that. That is beautiful. Go ahead.
And and if we're talking, so you mentioned the colorful lens. I forgot to touch on that. So, I mean, I would like to answer it in two parts. There's the literal and I think the figurative. So, the literal colorful lens would be like filmmaking, but I also think figuratively, I'm a shapeshifter. Like today, if you have to tell me that, you know, there is a human rights abuse that is gross and that needs to be addressed, tomorrow I'm a lawyer. If, NASA had to contact me and say, we want to fly you to the sun, and in exchange, we'll give R1 billion for girls' education. I will be an astronaut and I'll fly to the sun. So that's present in like my filmmaking, whether it's my thesis, whether it's radio, because at the core is like social activism. So I think it is okay for people also to shapeshift in that respect. Uh, and towards their activism and their leadership. It doesn't look just one way, and there's no traditional way to be a leader. So it's all of these things, whether it's filmmaking or it's like the shape shifting.
Yeah, 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 you're right. It makes so much sense. And especially nowadays where the world has just become a place for people who stack skills instead of uh, being specialized. Like a couple of decades back, being specialized would have been the best thing for a person, right? You'd be the best
Yeah.
plumber or the best car manufacturer or something. But now you have to stack other skills and wear different hats. Like you said, be a
Yes.
shapeshifter to be successful in this time
Mm.
and modern days. So I love that. I love how you put that. So your master's thesis focuses on the African personality, which is just a beautiful concept, and the economic unity of the African Union. So, how did your research on Pan Africanism inform your perspective on current issues like health disparities?
Yes. Thank you so much for that question. And I looked at the archives of the Organization of African Unity. It's now called the African Union, but my research was based on its founding decade in the 1960s. And I remember looking through its archives. And honestly, I felt the attempt, but also it was like an organized mess in the same way that, the healthcare systems, I believe, is an organized mess. And really, by that, I want to look at it two ways. If I have a look at healthcare, as well as organizations like OAU, which are made up by member states. Like these are, the highest in the land, at least the highest in the structure of the presidents themselves of these countries, right? So they are the crux of institutional power. And what I saw was deep institutional entanglements. And not only that, but they were lacking bridging networks between various levels of power, in which many people in that were marginalized. And you see the results of it trickling down into spaces like healthcare. And for me, the core of it, and something that I also explored within the OAU, was the position of women. So in this, hierarchical nature of power, and just the deep divide between, the people right at the top and the people whom they want to serve. And you see this reflected in society like healthcare, as I've mentioned. And I say women being the core, to be honest, not only because I believe women are the source, really, the source of life, um, but also that I touch on Pan-Africanism in this, right? And I touch on it not as this thing that people just, oh, it's nice. It's nice to say we're Pan-African. Oh, as Africans, we're the same person, which is not true. Like Africa is not a country, right? But it's like, how does it look in practical reality, in terms of economically? How do we unify so that all these institutional failures and marginalization by the global world, how do we come together to say, okay, we're going to form something institutional and powerful for the greater common good that is not only effective, but is sustainable. And women greatly left out of this conversation. And why I point to that, I mean, there's so much evidence to show that beyond just the sentiment of me saying that women are the source, really, when women acquire greater social standing, it automatically positively affects their healthcare and their survival, as well as their child and community. Like, if they're empowered, they're more likely to identify a healthcare issue within their child and get treatment. Or their agency means that there isn't a social stigma attached to, for example, seeking sexual reproductive healthcare, right? For example, let me give like something that maybe a lot of people know about, like teenage pregnancy. Girls sometimes they do ask for protection at hospitals, but nurses are like, these girls are loose, you're young, why are you even having sex? And then they go home and, that happens. So the greater agency of women has always been shown to positively impact themselves and society as a whole. And likewise, in institutional spaces where women hold power and are at the table, we see that these things act together. So I saw how institutional failures of like the OAU definitely reflected in the landscape of the people socially. And you see that in, for example, the healthcare space. Like, for example, and I will say this stat to anybody who will listen. Like, I remember being shocked reading about the fact that, one third of all surgeries in Africa are cesarean sections. However, regardless of that, the African woman is 50 times more likely to die after a cesarean section than in the so-called developed world. Not only that, but the maternal mortality rate in sub-Saharan Africa is the same as it was in the UK in 1900 and in Sweden in 1880. No, that is unacceptable. You know what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? What does that mean when you hold this institutional power and there's these great entanglements that really doesn't have as much political buy-in, such that it addresses it with the realization that without this core, there is nothing. You show me how you treat women, and I'll most likely tell you the state of your country. That's how I think of it. And so there's that healthcare disparity that you see reflected, that is just a reflection of, the institutional power, whether they might wish to impart change or not. There's just not enough political buy-in to effect that change. I mean, look at South Africa, where perhaps you can have institutional power with representation of women in government. To what extent we can debate that, but we see it is also the trigger warning. The great capital of the world in gender-based violence is very high. So these two are not, linked and coming together. So, and that's really because that institutional power does not have a greater slippage of
Mhm.
power and collaboration between people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's those are excellent points, especially the data with maternal death. It's honestly, it should be something that should worry every single person, because
yeah,
data might seem like numbers until it's your sister or your mom or you who
yeah,
becomes that data, right? So we cannot, it's not something somebody should ignore. Even if you're a man, you're a man in Africa, it could be your wife, it could be your daughter. So we really need to
mm,
understand the weight of this data and what it means and what it translates into when you look at an individual's life. You know, it affects children, it affects the husband, it affects the community around that woman. So it is very important. And like you said, educating women is has always been proven to be the best way to educate generations, right? The children of women who are educated tend to advance in education compared to uh, children from a household where the mother may not have such education. Um, so there are so many factors that need to be addressed to bring about real long-term change when it comes to whether it's the economy of the African economy or health disparities that have long existed. And you when you look at countries that are high in happiness or economic level, you can observe those things you've mentioned. Violence against women is very low in number.
yeah,
Almost all women are educated. They are allowed to work in the workforce. They're encouraged, and not just that, but they're also encouraged to have families, and they're given long maternal and even paternal leaves. In Yep, in
yeah,
some Northern European countries and Nordic countries, they have built such a utopic society, a utopian society,
yeah.
just by empowering women, and that's a part I think we as Africans should learn a lot. So thank you for pointing those things out. Um, well, when it comes to you have, unlike most of my other guests so far, you have a background in both film and radio. So what unique roles do you think these mediums play, and nowadays social media as well, in raising awareness and driving change for health equity? How can we use them? How can we utilize them?
Yes, I think first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that it humanizes those numbers. What does maternal mortality rate mean? Those are people behind those numbers. But also at the same time, um, the audio visual space is really powerful, and it's like a politician's favorite propaganda tool,
Yeah.
right? Because it has a powerful force to influence the imagination of people and dissemination of information, what is believed and what is not, who runs narrative, what is truth and what's not, and also furthermore, what are the solutions that are suggested from it. And I think in the healthcare space, not only does it humanize those numbers, but I think it helps to decode it and demystify it. What does it mean for a surgeon to be doing these complex operations? Like, as for me, I'm not in the healthcare space, right? But I remember reading a book about healthcare from a very prominent, surgeon. And as much as audiovisual, writing can also be you know, a form of activism and as a form of dissemination. And it's written in such a way that demystifies the space that I could better understand. Even though I'm not being in the
Mm-hmm.
operating rooms, I definitely could understand and humanize the way that the people were being narrated. So I think it definitely has a powerful impact to humanize people. And when you humanize, people can then better connect to it, and when they better connect to it, they are able to take hold of also their power and run the narrative. So, what does it mean when these maternal deaths, what does it mean, right? And as a people, we can decide as a society, no, these are human beings first and foremost, and we need to address it. And addressing it means institutional and social and other changes in society. So I think definitely it's power in influencing the imagination of people, solutions, who's humanized, who's not, and narrative, who then holds the power of narrative. So in the healthcare space, definitely that would help
Yeah,
greatly.
yeah, great points. I mean, because there are there are not that many people who understand technical things, right? When you talk about numbers and data and p-values and whatever it is in research that you do, the normal person don't understand those terms. And if
Yeah.
you want to bring about real change, you need to involve everybody, because it's everybody's issue. Health is everybody's problem, whether you're rich or poor or educated or uneducated, male, female. It doesn't matter. Health affects everyone, so it should be everybody's concern. So, like you said, humanizing it is extremely important to increase um, increase the understanding of the everyday person. So I actually like that idea, and I think one of the things that as physicians, as healthcare providers, as surgeons, we forget is that we're just so focused on the technical parts and the skill parts of things, and we forget that the most important thing to do is patient education, education of the larger population. So it's very important, and I think, like you said, media, whether it's social media or traditional media, plays an important role. And when you were explaining everything,
Yes.
I read this quote by Steve Jobs, and I'm just going to read out to you. It says, "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come." So, this is a person who have built an entire an entire fortune whatever company on media, even if it's Apple is a phone, but it has so many other things integrated into it. And when somebody like this makes a statement of such value, we need to listen and understand, and as Africans really um use storytelling, which is actually kind of our tradition anyway,
Mm,
right? And just,
it
yeah, and
really
just
is.
use it in a modern way to deal with many of the issues that we currently face. Um,
Yeah, and it
mhm.
democratizes it.
Yeah,
Democratizes it.
democratizes
Am I
it. Yeah,
saying it
you're
correctly?
saying it right. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely democratizes knowledge. It's not just, as I was mentioning, this thing that is
Hmm.
mystified. It's a surgical, and it's the doctors. They
Yeah.
deal with that. But it's the, as we're mentioning, the everyday, and how that is a part of our lived reality that we can have power and agency
Yeah.
over.
Yeah, for sure. So, you have this unique advantage because I know you work with the global surgery program at the University of Cape Town. And this, I think, gives you an opportunity for an in-depth understanding to, the health and surgical disparities, um, firsthand. So, is there any story that has stood out to you or that you can think of that highlights the need for an African-centered healthcare solution?
Mm. So, I don't want to glamorize Africa, right, and its knowledge systems. I think it would be disingenuous to say that we have been perfect, but no society is, right? And today, even the healthcare space has benefited greatly from an immersion of different cultures and their different traditional healing systems, as well as the medicinal capabilities. So I don't want to glamorize it. However, I think there are a few things that we can definitely learn and take from some indigenous healing and knowledge systems. And one of them we know commonly is Ubuntu, right? So there is a man by Dr. Dixon Chibanda, who is from Zimbabwe, and he founded the Friendship Bench. At the time in 2017, when he was speaking about it on
Mhm.
TEDx, right? He was one of the only 12 psychiatrists in the country, in Zimbabwe. And and that is a very traditionally Western thing for that one exclusive, highly educated, and unreachable person, because not many people can afford to see a psychiatrist. And even when they can, there's only 12 in the entire country. So he had this intervention called the Friendship Bench, where he makes use of grandmothers within communities, because in Zimbabwe, they hold, I would like to think of grandparents as, what they are to an African and Zimbabwean society and community, what a library is to a
Mhm.
university.
Mhm.
And I mean, even thinking of my paternal
Mhm.
grandmother, I definitely had that kind of connection with her. May her soul rest in peace. They're a source of comfort, they're a source of knowledge, and their knowledge is so deeply embedded in humanity. And so he trained these grandmothers because he saw that, well, actually there was a time when that actually helped another woman. And really, it has been
Mm.
very effective. Not only is this also cost beneficial to people, but it also empowers the grandmothers themselves, as well as the people who have this intervention, and
Yeah.
it has worked. There's more of them, more than just like the 12 psychiatrists. And I love that. So it's like exploring collaborative means of healthcare, I can say. And I want to link to this to 1950s in Cape Town. So they thought, why not, in the same way as they bring surgeons and doctors to the battlefield, why not bring healthcare to women? So they had what was called flying squads, where they would bring your midwives, your doctors, nurses, to the women. And it's that thing of not seeing healthcare as something elitist and it's only people who can afford it, but it is to be shared amongst many people. And furthermore, it is not only being shared amongst people, but it's coming to you in the way you understand it. In the same way,
Mhm.
like, for example, the Friendship Bench definitely took it in context of the Zimbabwean environment. I don't want to say African. I mean, yes, it's similar in a lot of African countries that Ubuntu exists, but
Mm.
they just take on different variations. And in Zimbabwe, definitely the grandmother is that source of knowledge, humanity, and healing in that. So
Wow.
yeah, so that intervention for me was amazing. And I want to think of something that Bruce Pickett said in the book that I didn't mention it, but it is called, it's actually here,
Yeah.
Safe Surgery for Africa.
Fantastic
um,
book.
Fantastic book. He says that good health is not dependent on pockets of excellence, but on functional, fully integrated healthcare systems.
Mhm.
And that's sort of what I want to end off in terms of thinking of Ubuntu. Not glamorizing it, but using modernized medical health methods, but context specific, and keeping in mind that there are some positives that we can take from our indigenous knowledge and health systems.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that project that you mentioned, the friendship bench, especially when you think about mental health conditions and how they are kind of taboo in most
Mhm.
African cultures, and we still have such a long way of teaching teaching people that it's not spiritual, it's not a taboo, it's something anybody can go through. And you should not, you cannot, you don't have to be ostracized about by it and things like that, right? So there's so much work that needs to be done when it comes to mental health advocacy in Africa,
Mm,
just because of the our culture. But you know it's beautiful how they empowered the grandmothers who are doing this, who are playing this role anyway, um, but just celebrating them and recognizing their contribution. It means a lot. So it's beautiful. And I was thinking, we are humans are one of the very few species in the world that have grand like grandparents generation, right? Most species don't make it that far. The other species that have the same
Mm.
system are whales. And uh, anthropologists were trying to figure out why do we need grandparents in society, whether it's in the animal kingdom or in humans. And it was to transfer wisdom, right? To transfer knowledge, all the knowledge and wisdom that has been embedded throughout that person's life should not go to waste and should be transferred to the next generation. So it has a whole background evolutionary advantage to having grandparents, and it's a beautiful way of
Hmm.
utilizing that you just described. And the flying squad, you're right. And Bruce, his book is incredible, and I recommend that for everybody to read that book, to, like you said, humanize what's going on in healthcare and understanding the data. So those are great points. And you yourself, you have um, you've done your own part. You've played your own part when it comes to um, activism in the healthcare space, and you've authored articles for the Yes We Can South African Foundation, documenting stories of women impacted by the work of the organization. So can you roughly tell us what the organization does, and how is storytelling a form of activism in the healthcare space?
Yes. So the organization delivers practical economic skills to empower Black and colored and just in general marginalized women so that they may be able to have economic agency. And we know economic agency really is the crux of a lot of other accessibilities and agencies in life.
Yeah.
And they're empowered in that way. They make their own money so that they can support themselves and their family.
Mm,
And you know what? Storytelling. So we have very many complex systems. And I view, for example, writing and films as the same thing.
mm,
You're really unpacking that complexity, and you're, as I've mentioned, also demystifying and decoding so that that message gets across. And in that, you're owning narrative. There's a sense of pride and power that
mm,
comes with that shaping narrative. So whether it's in the audiovisual medium or it's the written medium, in disseminating information that you're saying you're reclaiming, you're taking ownership and power in it. And when you can do that, you're able to reclaim your lived reality,
mm,
and that's whether it's a bad reality or it's a good reality.
mm,
Nevertheless, you first have to acknowledge it, and then you have to have the power to say, no, this is my reality. So what are we doing about it? Like the women that I've written about, they acknowledge that they come from economically disempowered backgrounds. So they're saying that's not going to be my story, that's not going to be my identity. I'm
mm,
going to empower myself and gain these skills, and I'm going to use them to make money for myself, and I'm going to have goals because they encourage them to be entrepreneurs. More than just the skills, they teach them how to be entrepreneurs so that it is
mm,
sustainable. So I really think it's that narrative is looking at the complexity, recognizing it, acknowledging it, decoding it, deconstructing it, and having the step by step. Because when you write, there's the beginning, middle, and end, or whatever. There's a weaving thread, even in audiovisual material, and saying, this is where I am, this is where I want to go based on my circumstances. And in that, I'm reclaiming it. I'm gaining my pride and my humanity at the same time. Because I mean, if you lose your pride, there's a sense of dignity that is lost in the process. But you reclaiming it and you're reclaiming your reality. And really, that is what can happen in the healthcare space. And I love to see that, as much as there are people who may not have as much power, there are also people in the surgical space that are saying we want to step outside
Mhm.
of this space and demystifying, and we're telling like the safe surgery for Africa. We're telling these narratives and we're going beyond the operating rooms so that we can have that, you know, for us to be able to solve these
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. Very powerful, very, very powerful. And I think, like anything, we need to start small, start wherever we're comfortable, but
Yeah.
share the stories. I think a lot of people would be amazed to hear what healthcare providers see day to day on the daily basis. And if you really think about it, there are a lot of medical shows that are, grossing quite high. They're famous, like Grey's Anatomy and stuff like that. So that the way you tell the story, and telling the story in a way that makes it palatable is very important. So instead of showing something fake, there are so many beautiful things, and challenging things at the same time, that people need to see in the healthcare arena. And I think that will definitely help people understand the issues, and how important those issues are, and that sometimes we need immediate solutions, even if it doesn't feel immediate for the
Yeah.
individual. But when you put it
Mm.
in a way that they understand, then they would also understand the urgency. So yeah, I love that you're all for storytelling, and I
Mhm.
am too. So when we story, go
Sorry, I
ahead.
just want
Yeah.
to add before you
Yeah.
go from that, I'd like that you mention that in that you kind of speak to power dynamics between, the person who needs to receive the information for the betterment. But I remember you also mentioned that the people are also hesitant about the healthcare space. It's like spiritual and other things which are in some ways valid. However, at the same time you need to question, why is it that people are more comfortable relying on alternative forms of healthcare, which are maybe not as formalized as the allopathic healthcare space. you know there's the gap, the institutional and power gap that really needs to be bridged at the end of the day. And without these bridging stories, the narratives, it's going to be very hard for you to meet in that space because it's that block between them and
Mhm.
us.
Yep, 100% agree. 100% agree. And we really need to leverage this, the power of storytelling to bridge that gap. So how do we, when we storytell, we have to be careful, because we have seen many stories being told about Africa,
Mm,
that are, they may be true but unnecessarily exaggerated, or have
mm,
been held for so long despite so much progress taking place. So, how do we ensure that stories we are being told, or we are telling, are authentic and empowering rather than exploitative, particularly when
mhm.
highlighting vulnerable communities like women and children?
Yes. Yes. So first, we need to own our own stories, but also I'll come back to get that. But also at the same time, when we look at stories, I think it is always helpful for me at least to trace who benefits from the performance of that oppression or the performance of that inequality. And I say performance, not to say that, poverty is a performance. Absolutely not. It's a lived reality. But the manner in which people are filmed can look like a performance for, like the child, the hungry child with the fly on the eye. We all know that famous image, right? It's a performance of African poverty. It's real, it's there, but the manner in which it is distributed and the headlines and what is said about that and how what is said about the African
Mhm.
continent as a country, that is the problem. So it's like who is telling the story and who benefits from selling an image and an
Mhm.
idea And that's very important. And unfortunately, for now, right now, there's still so many people who hold that kind of power, to control narrative and to be exploitative about the marginalized people, whether it is women or children and men alike. And it's really us having to own those stories. And when we own those stories, we need to understand that we also have power. Like, as much as I may not be as powerful as maybe a health conglomerate, a health power, I also have power in my own right. And I need to, going back to the everyday leader, recognize how my power not only in storytelling, I can use it in storytelling, but how my power acts upon another person. So, for example, when I am filming, I like to refer to them as social actors. And I've taken a liking, and I'll definitely explore this more in the future, which is participatory
Mhm.
filmmaking. And that is a process of, while not completely removing power dynamics, it's, you can try as much as
Mm.
possible. What that does is that not only does it view the social actor, whether it is the woman or the child, as somebody who has equal involvement and in passing down knowledge and narrative, but also actively participates in the filmmaking process. So sometimes filmmakers will like give you consent. You know, there's consent, but it's not informed consent. You don't know which channels that this information is going to go to. You don't know that it's going to be on like this big broadcasting channel. You don't know that it's going to be on this big film, platform, and that they're going to be making amounts of money from it, and then you're just going to be left
Mhm.
to your own advices after. Or the image of your child, it becomes the poster for hunger in Africa with a fly on their eye. So there's the issue of informed consent, and them actually actively participating in the filmmaking process. No, I don't like that shot. It depicts me as somebody who's,
Mhm.
you know, powerless. I actually want to be depicted in this way. Furthermore, filmmaking is not just, and storytelling is not just what you film on screen, it is what is written beforehand and how you
Mhm.
edit. Because now it means something. If
Mhm.
I am talking about poverty, let's say I put poverty, the word poverty on the screen, and then I show in the shot after that poster child, the hungry child in Africa, it means something vastly different than if I put another
Yeah.
image. So they also participate in that editing process to say, okay, no, 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 I don't like what this implies. This back and then this, that. I don't like what implies. I don't like that you start with this. Um, the poverty idea. I want you to start with my family. I want you to first humanize me. Start with who I am, and then we can talk about, okay, these are the health disparities. This is the poverty. This is whatnot. So we have to own our stories. And when we own our stories, we have to understand our power in relation to other people and try as much as possible to bridge that power gap. And I think in filmmaking space, at least participatory forms of filmmaking really help. So while we are a long way to go to fight institutional power and global power, let's at least with what we have in our devices used to for the greater good and be cognizant of our power.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I completely agree. Wow. Participant, did you say participatory storytelling? Yeah.
participatory.
Whoa,
Yes.
that is beautiful. That is such a powerful thing. You're right, because even the soundtrack you use makes a difference, right? Even the tone of colors you use when you edit
Yes.
something. It's just when you were talking about it, I was just thinking, oh wow, that is, you're right. There are so many things that give subconscious messaging. And
Yeah.
change how you look at the picture you're looking at, just because your mind has
Mm,
been ripened to look at it a certain way. So I completely agree,
yeah.
and we have to hand over the story to the owners of the story, because yeah, I mean, most of the African population may live in poverty, but they're one of the happiest people as well. They're so filled with so much hope. When you talk to people, they tell you what they're going to do tomorrow, what they want to do in 5 years, and what plans they have for their lives and their children's lives and things like that. So there are so many things that are just masked with that horrible narrative, but there are so many beautiful things underneath. So giving the power back to the owner of the stories will bring, bring to light the reality and the hope and the beauty behind all of those things that might not look so polished from from a first glance. So I love that. So what advice, you're young and there are so many
Mm.
um young voices in Africa, upcoming young voices. So what advice would you give to young leaders who want to use their unique skills, whether in, filmmaking or writing, like audiovisual or writing, to make tangible impact in their community? How can they use their power and their voice?
Yes, I think first and foremost, have audacity. Have audacity, honestly, because a lot is rigged against you. Not only the issues that even powerful people like governments fight against, but also because you're youth. I had a conversation with a diplomat and professor earlier this week, actually, and he was trying to understand, to bridge the gap between the youth and I don't want to call them the elderly, but the wiser
Yeah.
citizens. And, we joke about it. And really, I was trying to explain that, you know what? What I've noted is that there is definitely a hierarchy. Let me just give like a typical Zimbabwean household, for example, not wanting to refer to Africa as a country, but let's look at in Southern Africa and, for example, Zimbabwe. There is a great hierarchy between, you know, the parent and the child. And that sometimes looks like, you can't really correct the parent. They can never really be wrong, and you just need to listen. And that sometimes can pacify a child. And in a world where we need to be very sharp and quick and very empowered and confident, because the kids know a lot now more than our parents' generation. So they need to be very confident and seek out information, how to use AI, how to use technology, how to use that, and speak in powerful rooms more than before where that was not as possible. So it can pacify a child, and because of this, there's this hierarchy and there's this power, there's no slippage and there's no correction between the two so that we can move forward in a better way. So I see that reflected also in institutions. So the people in government, them versus the
Mhm.
youth, there is still that parental hierarchy, but without the
Mhm.
responsibility. So as much as maybe that generation may complain that, oh, Gen Zs, they're lazy or they are too sensitive, which I don't believe is true, by the way. I really believe that they also have a greater responsibility to pass down
Mhm.
generational knowledge, because as much as generational wealth is
Yeah.
circular, so is generational knowledge, and they have the greater responsibility to reach out. But since that is not always neatly the
Mhm.
case, I think it is okay for the youth to recognize that first and
Mhm.
foremost, but also having the audacity to
Yeah.
challenge it. It's like challenging your parent. Ooh, you're in for a fight, but it's nevertheless really necessary to break that
Yeah.
barrier so that we may be able to impart change, because it's an ever-changing world. So you have to break down those barriers because those barriers are not working. Break them down, but to be able to do that, have
Mhm.
audacity. And going back to what I said at the beginning about being the everyday leader, use whatever you have in your capabilities, your knowledge, and all of that, and capacity for the greater common good, really.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's an undeniable generational gap. Technology has just shifted everything. Back then, from one generation to the next, not a whole bunch of things would change. Few things would change, certain advancements might take place. But because of technology, the younger generation, like my younger sister and my parents, they're in a completely different, they basically live on the same earth but in a different, completely different world. So it's so
Mm,
amazing. And this too, we all have to share the same, the same life right now, with the same existence. So it's always interesting when I see the interaction between those two different generations, including
Yeah.
mine as well, with younger and older generations. So you're right, and audacity is very important. And I think one thing that you mentioned is that young people have to understand the power of the technology and the platforms that they're using, because they can either reinforce the negative narrative that has already been put out there about their country, their people, or Africa, or
Mm,
they can work to change it. Because sometimes, if you're not intentional about the content you're putting out, you might be exaggerating or fitting into the negative or the bad narrative or the false
yes.
narrative that has been out there. So, um, how do you think young people can just be careful and be mindful about and intentional about the content that they put out there, um, in in times like this?
Yes. It's again going back to power. You have to first and foremost always acknowledge, as much as you acknowledge your disempowerment, but also in like recognize your power within the space. And going back to Ubuntu, when you recognize your power, okay, I've said I have this power, this is also where I'm disempowered. How does it fit in the larger scheme of the community? So when I look at this, video, all right, I think I'm having a laugh at this. This is hilarious. This is great, but also greatly disempowers. I have the power to just share, press the share button, and it
Yep.
goes to everybody.
Yep.
But I also have the power not to do that,
Hmm.
and to be more mindful of my the power at the tips of my hands, but also that greater responsibility that we have in Ubuntu.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's gonna take some time to get there, I believe, because I think we're still suffering the colonial condition of individuality and the decadence that has come with like indulging in even social media. Because social media is fast. It's like now we
Yep.
need instant gratification. So we don't think about the greater good and the greater need.
Yeah.
It's just about what can you get done then and there, and what euphoric feel can you feel after disseminating this information.
Yeah.
And sometimes it might be overtly harmful. Sometimes people don't even realize it. But if you have that greater awareness and that intentionality that I mentioned before, I think it's a lot better. Although I want to say, when you were talking about, the youth having power in this audiovisual and writing space, I want to go back to even the conversation I had with the professor and talking about how I wish it would be beyond these other forms of power only, limiting youth to these forms of power,
Mm.
and recognizing that it is also a seat at the table, recognizing it's beyond just conversation. It
Mm-hmm.
is a bridging of knowledge and institutional power that is collaborative. And that audacity, I want to point out, it's not disrespect.
Yes.
It is really not disrespect. Like, for example, saying your parent, you're wrong in this space. You cannot be treating mental health as though it is nothing, right? Because this, and that. That's a healthy conversation to have. So that audacity to challenge the hierarchies that are toxic in this respect, in the same way that the youth might challenge that hierarchy in that respect, it's not disrespect, but it is healing,
Yeah.
I would say. So it is healing both at an institutional level, but also healing in the power that we have in storytelling, audiovisual material, and writing, and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Great advice. I hope whoever is watching this or going to be watching this just takes this message to heart, um, and do good with it. So we're kind of coming to the end of this conversation. I mean, I loved every single wisdom that you've shared right now, so far, and we have this tradition where the previous guest leaves a question to the next guest, and without knowing who the next guest is going to be, and you don't know who the previous guest was unless you watched the previous episode. But it was a very powerful, very driven, amazing young woman that was who was our guest, and she asked, "How are you creating a structure that encourages diversity and representation of women in your field of work?"
Ooh, I love that
Hmm.
question, right? Because power, 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 speaking back to power. So, you know, um, sometimes, so of course, I have to be cognizant of like my positionality as a woman, and I recognize my limitations, but also how even my position can negatively impact another position of a woman because of maybe different power dynamics. But it's as Zozibini Tunzi has mentioned about like, taking up space, women needing to take up space. And I love that. I think in any space, as much as possible, you need to be able to acknowledge the full autonomy
Mm-hmm.
of people and allow people to take up space. And of course, for me, I'm always cognizant of like maybe racial, sexual, and gendered relations. So it's about opening the space for people to take up space and knowing that it's not like a challenge. Because sometimes we can view the opinion of a Black woman differently from the opinion of like maybe a white man as maybe more assertive and
Mm-hmm.
smart and intelligent, whereas maybe a Black woman, it's its attitude, she's being a bossy, but it's allowing people to take up space and understanding that also representation isn't just the face, of the story. It is also in the background. For example, filmmaking, it's not just the woman who we are selling as a story, but it's her in the background also having the decision making process with what's going to end up on screen and how she is presented, and therefore owning her narrative and her
Mm-hmm.
story. So it's both of those things at the same time. It is recognizing that they are always power relations. So you always need to allow people to take up space. And for that, you need to be self
Mm-hmm.
reflective. Furthermore, that, it is also beyond the face, but also what is happening in the background, in the cracks when people are not watching. That will always, almost always be reflected in the public eye. That means in the healthcare space, that means, oh, there's a great decrease in maternal mortality rates because, women are not just like the faces in government, but they're actually part of the decision making process and in the home and etc. and etc. And in film, you see that the film doesn't look exploitative of people, but it's them telling you their story, vastly different things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I great message, really. I love it. I know it's such a powerful question because it came from a very powerful woman, woman, but um,
I love powerful women.
an amazing woman. So we're at the end, and what's next for you? And how do you plan to continue blending your creative, research, and leadership skills to champion health equity?
Oh, I'm afraid. Can I tell you? Can I tell you? I want to keep it a surprise, actually. You'll be the first to know. You'll be the first to know, but there is definitely a way, something that I've never done before. Like I told you, I'm a shapeshifter. So it's none of the things that I've ever done before, but they are greatly linked and actually will be like a physical manifestation. I think that's all I can say. So my academics, my filmmaking, my creative expressions, my storytelling and activism will all physically manifest at the same time. I think that's all I'm gonna say for now.
I'm so
Yeah.
excited. I just look forward to all the things, all the good things you're going to do with the skills and knowledge and spirit that you have. And I really would like to say I admire you again. I think a lot of young ladies can learn a lot from you. just using their talents and their kindness to do good for other people and especially other women. So thank you so much for coming on this series, Sherelle, and I just look forward to seeing more stuff from you. Please don't be a stranger, okay?
No, no, never. And no, thank you so much for having me on this platform. I think it's a very impactful platform. I've listened to some of the everyday leaders, and I love to see the work. I love to see the work that you're doing. I love to see women doing
Yes.
things. I love and owning the space. So no, thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
thank you. All right. You enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you so much and hope to see you soon.
See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for our audience for joining. If you want to watch our previous episodes or upcoming episodes, follow my LinkedIn page at Anania K Admasu and follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Everyday Leader podcast with Dr. Anania. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.